going on, Archons? What is happening in the week of KeyForge for you? I know if you're in the United States and you're watching this, you're probably just tickled pink right now because you're cracking those packs of Dark Tidings, which have been a deprived enjoyment from your life thus far, unless you ship some stuff up from Canada. I just wanted to talk about some things today in my KeyThoughts vlog. Now, just a little word of warning: if you see me suddenly jump and the audio goes silent, that is because the fire alarm testing happened again. It's basically been random right now because they're making up missed sweets from the initial testing. So I apologize if that happens. You will not hear it. You'll just get to enjoy my moment of anxiety and being startled from the sound. But I think they might be done. But just a word of warning. So today on the books, what we're going to be doing is I want to first go over my icons that I do in my deck openings. I have a lot of new people joining the YouTube party, and I just want to make sure everyone's clear what those icons mean. It'll be a very quick overview of that. Then I want to talk about Dark Tidings composition and the set and things I've noticed, especially with people in the US getting to get their hands on it now. And then lastly, I'm going to finish off with the card of the week. Before we get started with anything else, I just want to give a shout out to my man Vault Boy and also Mediator Jay. Jim, thank you both so much for becoming my Patreon supporters. This month I will be doing 2 giveaways because things went up. Next month I think we're actually going to be going up to 3, maybe even 4, depending on if some more people jump on before the end of the month. But I'm getting the numbers up to what I need to start giving away almost a deck a week, which is the goal of this whole enterprise, I guess. So yeah, I'm excited to give away decks, and I think I may do it through the Bag of Decks series, which will be coming up very shortly. So you never know which set's going to be given away, which I think is kind of a fun thing. And then of course we got the new Would You Rather series dropping this Sunday, which will be a set v set Would You Rather, and I'm going to probably take polls now and then to see what you want to go against the upcoming set. This weekend will be the inaugural Coda versus Dark Tiding, which is very interesting. The first set that ever came out versus the most recent set that ever came out, and I think it's a cool matchup. Alright, so let's get into the icons. So, if you're watching my videos, I put the stats on display, and I do that off camera. Like, I don't know if you would prefer for me to do them on camera and make the videos a lot longer. I don't mind doing that if that's what you would like, but I think it's more interesting to talk about the composition within the deck rather than go over the minutia of it when I can just show it through those stats. But I don't know if everyone understands what those icons necessarily mean or how I utilize the icon, so I just want to do a quick overview of that. First up, there is the raw number. That is just basically printed ember on the cards. Very straightforward, that one. Next up says CC, that stands for creature count, however many creatures are in the deck. Again, very straightforward. And then next up is the ember icon with a line through it, which is, I kind of took all these from the mass mutation enhancement icons. So that is actually the capture icon, which I use to represent ember control. And that number represents how many cards in the deck can do something to control ember in some way. Key cost increase, lose ember, steal, capture, anything like that. It's the number of cards, not the potency of the cards. So that number doesn't represent the strength of ember control, but just knowing the composition of how many cards within those 36 cards you can rely on can somehow control ember. Some of them may be recurring because it's in the form of a creature or an artifact. Others may be you play it once and that's it. The point is, you have that many answers within the deck. It does not speak to the strength of how much it does and if it's reusable or anything like that. If you think I should maybe view this a different way, I'm open to suggestions. But I think this is the most straightforward way of just having an idea of how many cards you can draw into and have to actually get to do that. I don't know if maybe if they're a creature, they should count for more, like an extra point or something, because they stay on the board and it's not just a one-time use. But that's another discussion for another day in general with how I do this. But that's how it is being used currently. Next up, we have the board control stat, which I use the damage icon from the enhancements. and that just means how many cards within the deck can deal damage. Now, generally, I do not count damage pips in this. I think I may do it where I count all the damage pips and then have it, but for the most part, I don't really count damage pips. I do count creatures that deal 1 damage or an action that deals 1 damage, even though I don't count damage pips. I'm now thinking those maybe count for half a point, because I think if it's not... No, you know what? I still count them. I think I just find damage pips I didn't count as strong, but maybe I need to rethink that a little bit. But as of right now, it's basically, again, the number of cards that can do damage, not the strength of damage. Not if it's a board clear, not if it's a destroy a creature. It's just anything that can deal damage, so you know what you can rely on for different various ways. It's kind of a broad overview. It's not like a true deep dive into what the deck icons or stats do. It's more just an awareness of the composition of board control versus ember control versus efficiency versus disruption. That's really all that these are. It's a very loose and kind of quick overview. The idea is if you're in a sealed environment, you're kind of getting an idea where you can do things like this to get a quick idea. And if you open enough decks and see this, and hopefully viewing my decks the way I do this, it kind of starts getting your brain to understand how a deck will play based on what the stats are. And then next up, we have the efficiency stat, which I use as the draw icon. And this is anything that draws a card, archives a card, lets you house cheat, bring stuff back from your discard, can even... More recently, I've been including the tide of this. If it raises the tide, I will count that as an efficiency stat, because you're not having to take chains, which would actually go against being efficient. So with Dark Tidings, that is something I have included. So it's all those things that kind of increase the efficiency of the way your deck can play in one way or another. Next up, we have the disruption stat, which I have marked with a purple card with a minus sign instead of a plus, because you are disrupting your opponent in some way. This can be you have a card that disrupts your opponent's ability to do certain effects, so therefore they have to alter their game plan and take care of that card. It can discard cards from your hand. It can reduce the ability to draw cards. What else is there in it? House restrictions, anything like that, it goes into this category. And then lastly, we have Ember Generation. So Ember Generation is basically... This is probably the most confusing of all the stats that I have on here, because the Ember Generation stat does not make sense just looking at the number. And this is kind of the main reason why I decided to do this. So the way it works is I take the number... It's actually a roar from Time Shaper's Sanctimonious that got me using this formula for Ember Generation. So what she determined was it's 18 Ember minus your raw Ember plus 7. That's the number that you start with, okay? And then from there, whatever that number is, it tells you what you have to reap. But what I've decided to do is take any card that will end up generating Ember for me and having that as part of the equation, making the number lower. So the idea is the higher the number, the more you have to use your board to generate Ember, i.e. reaping. The lower the number, the less you're going to have to necessarily use your board just for reaping. So that could be there's a reap ability that gets extra Ember. That could also mean there's a fight ability that generates Ember. And then anything that steals, you gain Ember, anything like that. Now, again, this number does not speak to the potency of how much Ember is gained. It's playing cards. The idea is how many cards are going to generate Ember. Maybe I should include the amount of Ember, but it's more just how many cards do you have to see. So it promotes the idea of cycling, how much will you have to cycle your deck to do it. So it's if you went through your deck one time, what are the opportunities you're going to have to generate Ember? It's not the amount of Ember. I know that seems kind of weird, but I find it speaks the best to what it is. So basically, if the number is 0, your deck is going to be very efficient in generating Ember. If it's at 10, I would say you're going to have to use your board quite a bit. If it's above 10, it's really not good at generating Ember, and you're going to heavily need the use of your board and just using your creatures to reap in order to generate Ember. So I find if it's around the 5, 7, 8 range, that seems to be almost the typical. A really good deck is going to be 0, obviously. So that's all the stats for that, how I go over my decks. Next up, I have the talking about Dark Tidings. Now, as I've opened decks, I've noticed a glaring obvious stat, and that is that 15 or 16 creatures is what you're looking for. And so it's a relatively low creature count set. And that's kind of interesting in a way, because having a low creature count set after just having Worlds Collide and Mass Mutations, which you could argue were very high creature count sets, is it's kind of shocking in a way, but it also makes a lot of sense when I think about it more. Right, Fuzzy? Yeah, he agrees. It makes so much sense because of the fact that it's interesting to have a set that's going to play differently. Now, there may be pros and cons to this, but the fact that you have a set that is doing a different stat in the creature sector is interesting, and there's more actions and such in here, and artifacts make a very interesting decision to be made within the gameplay and the composition of what you're going to be opening and how it will match up against older sets. And at first you kind of get this like almost like shock and maybe even disappointment, but then you realize that if every set was exactly the same, the game is not different from set to set. There's not an evolution in things, and that is what I think is so interesting in a cool game space decision, to actually be like, you know what, let's have something different in this upcoming set, and I'm curious to see how this evolves over time and how this is done, because it definitely makes different decisions to be made and different aspects that have to be considered as a result. So I like that it is different. I don't know if it's stronger as a result, but I do like that those decisions are being made with design. Like, let's make this different from the previous sets. Let's switch it up, because it makes a lot more interesting decisions to be made within the game of KeyForge and the set v set sort of interactions. Now, the card of the week. This one is Static Collection Array. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this is it's an artifact that gives you an Ember Pip in Star Alliance, and it says your keys cost -1 while the tide is high and +1 while the tide is low, with the flavor text, tides on the Crucible behave in strange and often unpredictable ways. It's an uncommon, so you can get more than one, and if you have more than one, it actually makes very interesting decisions to be made. So when you have more than one, you're basically creating a situation where you're going to have to forge keys at 8 a lot. On the flip side of that, your opponent is going to be taking a lot of chains in order to ensure that either A, they stop you from forging, or they make you forge for a higher cost. Now, you have to decide. When you have one, it's a little bit more straightforward. But when you have two, or maybe if there's even three, that proposition to make your keys cost more, either like it's a no-brainer. Your opponent has to do something about the tide against you when you're in that position, because you could be forging for 4, for 3, for 5. Like, that is really efficient. So if they don't have cards to flip the tide easily, they're going to be chaining themselves a lot. But you also have to understand that the trade-off is that you may have to be in a position where you need to generate more Ember than general, because you're going to be put up. So you need to create those interesting propositions where you decide, do you want to actually give your opponent chains frequently and slow them really down so that they have to kind of make decisions of I'm not drawing as much because I don't want them to forge, and therefore maybe that gives you an advantage. So you're slowing down on the forging the keys steps, but at the same time you are also causing your opponent to have to make decisions that are really going to slow down their gameplay, and is that a good trade-off for you? And every deck that you go against will create a different proposition, as well as the deck that this exists in. If you have a deck that generates a really good Ember, I think this is less of an issue, but it's such an interesting card to me. I mean, this is just a really cool, interesting design and decisions within the game of KeyForge, and I like that. And that is what I feel is the essence of Dark Tidings. Is there a lot of propositions that make you decide, should I do this? Is this worth doing? Is the benefit worth the drawback? So it's so cool to see things like this exist in the game, and I'm absolutely loving it. That's why I really like this set, because it's not straightforward. There are a lot of decisions. There are a lot of trade-offs in what you do, and it just makes for really interesting gameplay. So hope you all enjoyed this one. If you are enjoying these videos, I'd love if you became a Patreon supporter. There's a link in the comments. And yeah, just appreciate everyone's support, all the comments. Let me know your thoughts on things today. These were my key thoughts for the week. And as always, folks, may your ember never be stolen and your keys forged promptly. Have a good one.